This being the time and place, I call the September Planning Zoning Board meeting to order. Before we set the agenda, there are two members that cannot be with us and are listening in. Christine and Gerald will be listening in, and Allison Cottingham will not be able to join us tonight. So the first thing we need to do is to go over our core value, our vision statement, as we do before any meeting before the city. So the vision statement is that Belmont will be a vibrant, multi-generational community that incorporates small town charm and heritage with an entrepreneurial spirit. Our mission statement, the City of Belmont provides visionary leadership and high-quality city services to create a community of choice for our residents, visitors, and employees. And so our core values are to maintain balance and open-mindedness in executing duties and uphold the professionalism and ethics expected of all elected officials. So the first thing this evening after this is to set the agenda. Is there a motion to do so? So moved by Matt and second by Dan. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Minutes are approved as written. The adoption of the minutes from our August 26th Planning Zoning Board. Hopefully everyone's had the opportunity to read through the minutes. Any additions or corrections that anyone has noticed in the minutes? If not, I'd look for a motion to approve as presented.
So moved.
So moved by Nick, second. Second by Norman. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. The minutes are approved as presented. Two public items today. I don't know that we have any speakers here to speak, but if we do, there's two sign-up sheets up there, I believe, for anyone to sign up. The first item is ZA 2018.03 and this is an amendment to the Home2 Suites conditional zoning district that was done earlier. And I think, Melissa, are you going to present on behalf of the city?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening. Tonight we have before you an amendment to the conditional zoning district for Home2 Suites, ZA 2018.03A. And the subject parcels that are comprised of this request are parcels 301396 and 301397, owned by Southern Benedictine Society and Montcross Holly Ave, LLC. So the specific request before you tonight is to remove parcel 301397, highlighted in yellow, from the conditional zoning district. A little background on this. When this originally started going through the approval process, there were 6 parcels that comprised the subject area. The site-specific development plan for the hotel comprised 5 complete parcels and a portion of the 6th parcel. As you can see on the bottom right, a subsequent recombination plat was recorded, resulting in the 2 parcels. And the request is to remove that tract B on the west from the conditional zoning district. This happened because the original approval ordinance did not specify that a portion of that parcel was to be rezoned. Therefore, the whole parcel was rezoned. And this is important to complete this action because as it is, that parcel cannot be further developed. It's tied to this conditional zoning district. So the only permitted use is this hotel, and it's important that we enter this property back into the HC zoning district so it can then be developed in the future and be a better part of our tax base. So it's just a simple, quick, straightforward request, but in our regulations, we are not authorized to do this at the staff level. So we are taking it through the process. As with all amendments, we look at plan consistency, and staff asserts that this request is consistent with the vision and goals of the comprehensive land use plan and the Montcross small area plan, specifically regarding goal number 1, land use. Like I said, by increasing and building a healthy tax base that provides choice in services, and goal number 2, economy. We want to foster a vibrant economy, diversified tax base that balances residential growth with employment and commerce. As stated, this is a reasonable request and in the public interest because without approval, this commercial parcel is unable to be further developed. So we ask tonight that you receive this report, any public comments, render a recommendation of approval to City Council, and to make the 2 required findings. Before you, we have a sheet that would help assist with the motion. So I stand by for any questions and concerns.
Can you put the plat back up, please? So the roadway that's on 6, I guess that's what they're asking relief. So I don't have a point of the road that goes into the hotel goes across 6, right?
Right, it says shared access easement, but specifically the whole parcel highlighted in yellow needs to be removed from this conditional zoning district. So that road, that's not a relevant part of this request.
Even though that's their access into the hotel, which is in that different zoning, or when you say shared with the shared.
Shared like the larger driveway, so that's just like there's portions of the driveway on each parcel. That's not a problem.
Was it done in the form of an easement on 6?
Yeah.
So there's the shared access easement across 6.
So 6 would use that road as well.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
so
okay.
that's developed a- Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's my question.
This has been a while. How did this come about? Was it just a
Well, I think
light
our
bulb?
director we always try to review the county zoning layer for GIS and just discovered like something doesn't look right here, and did a little more research and found that the whole portion was rezoned. So now it's 2 parcels and it's problems that we need to correct.
Yeah, so is this a problem that was created at the time, or is this something that, because it sounds to me like they're just trying to dump a parcel that's not usable for anything unless it's combined with the other one? Because, I mean, you couldn't do anything with that small little sliver, right?
So the way it usually works is that we're really clear and coordinate with the county to just include the area that's in the site-specific plan. So it was never intended to be a part of this rezoning. That's, by error at the time, that just didn't include the proper wording and coordination so that they see all these parcels, they drew the boundary for the zoning, and it's a staff error, and the city is the applicant that's correcting that. So
Okay.
there's no intended.
I mean, I could see them having the whole thing rezoned, and if they didn't need all that, they don't know what they're going to run into, right? Then come back after the fact and
Right.
have it
yeah,
come back.
that's-
Either way, it doesn't matter.
yeah,
So I
that
think,
could happen, but in this case, it was specific to the boundary that was always only intended to be a portion of that.
Okay. Any other questions of staff?
Make a motion to approve as presented.
There's a motion by Matt, second by Dan to approve as presented. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. It is approved as presented unanimously. Chair is also open to the statement of consistency. As you have in front of you, each of you have this. We also have, Melissa, would you go back to the findings? So I'm open to a motion for the statement of consistency as well.
Okay, I'll do it. So I'd like to make a motion that the project is reasonable and in the public interest, and it is consistent with the goals of the comprehensive land use plan for land use and economy.
Second.
There's a motion, there's a second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. That's also approved unanimously. Thank you.
Never happened. Like it
Never happened.
Like it never happened.
So the second item this evening is TA 2021 Traffic Impact Analysis Text Amendment. As everyone here is aware, we've been working on this for several months, and Tiffany, you're going to present the final recommendation to us, correct?
That's correct. So I'm hoping that this one goes just as smoothly as that last one. And so, as shared, this is our final recommendation for your consideration. This is text amendment TA 2021.03 regarding TIA updates specifically to Chapter 16 of our Land Development Code. Just a brief recap from where we started to where we are now. We began conversations about possibly updating our traffic impact analysis requirements back in February of 2021 with a joint workshop between Planning Board and City Council. And since then, we have had several additional meetings to discuss in detail our current processes and some options for consideration for possible updates. Staff has continued following that meeting with some additional research and then some recommendations for your consideration. And we are now at proposed revisions to our ordinance requirements that are presented as a text amendment here tonight for your feedback and hopefully recommendation for approval. So really quickly, an overview of the recommendations that we've continued to talk about for the last few meetings, broken down into three main points: the addition of bike and pedestrian analysis and mitigation options within our ordinance, a threshold change for development specifically located on the peninsula, and then lastly, enhanced payment in lieu standards for mitigation for development who would like to consider that option. So as a reminder, our existing TIA ordinance already has some language related to bike and pedestrian analysis. So that is specifically in the area of site access and in our transportation mitigation agreement sections right now. And so as a part of our review, one of the things we wanted to see is how we could enhance this. So this is not a new concept. We're just trying to beef it up a little bit. And so we know we talked about this in one of our earlier discussions with the planning board. And the more staff thought about it and tried to analyze it, one of the questions that kept arising in those conversations is really, where is our bike and pedestrian priority area? And so it's staff's opinion that that area as a priority is really in our Center City Small Area Plan, which is located on our map in the area circled in yellow to the left of this slide. Our comprehensive land use plan defines this area as one that promotes a growing and vibrant community, allows infill development that's designed to be connected to existing streets, that pedestrian facilities should be an extension of the existing downtown, and that new development should address the urban character of the site. And so we felt like that was in support of this area being chosen as really the priority area for consideration of additional analysis for bike and pedestrian improvements. Looking at that area in more detail, the image to the left shows a map of that proposed boundary for your consideration. And then the image to the right shows the same area, but the transportation map specifically with the multimodal recommendations that were included in the comprehensive land use plan. So as you can see, this area does have quite a few areas identified as recommended improvements already. But in addition to that, there may be opportunities for enhancements that are revealed as part of a traffic impact analysis study that includes multimodal within this area. Not only does the comprehensive land use plan talk about this area having priorities for bike and pedestrian infrastructure, but the Main Street team's work plan also reinforces that. So one of their economic development strategies that they've identified is that Main Street would have distinct districts that are connected by trolley, trail, sidewalks, and city streets in order to offer a variety of experiences within this area. And they've also noted an action item of how the city should get there, and that is to increase the public safety and walkability in our downtown districts. And so It's staff's opinion that by focusing bike and pedestrian recommendations and analysis specifically in this area will help us to achieve that goal. So one example I just wanted to share with you really briefly is the Chronicle project that you see on the screen there. Because we didn't have this language as a component of our traffic impact analysis at the time that project went through, it's likely that if it were analyzed, that a crossing at Park and Catawba Park Keener and Catawba would have been identified there for pedestrians that would have linked maybe the river district of downtown to the historic downtown. Instead, that wasn't identified as a potential pedestrian improvement that would be needed. And so the city is currently working to coordinate with NCDOT to make that connection happen, but that is again at the city's cost as opposed to the developer's cost. And so to summarize that portion of the proposed text amendment, what's included in the draft submitted here tonight is that the amendments for bike and pedestrian infrastructure would be that in addition to what we already have, we would collect traffic volume counts for bicycles and pedestrians in all of the traffic studies that are done, and to add multimodal operational analysis specifically in the Center City Small Area Plan, which would allow us, again, to look at recommendations for off-site connectivity and safety mitigation for bike and pedestrian, in addition to vehicular traffic. So, we do have some tools right now that allow us to work with developers in terms of getting bike and pedestrian infrastructure put in, such as greenways and things like that, that are on some adopted plans. A lot of times, though, that's when those alignments overlay their proposed site. So this would allow us to potentially go beyond that for maybe some small segments of sidewalk within this area that would be helpful to supporting a proposed new development, or even some crosswalks or some signals, whatever is revealed as part of that additional analysis. All right. So the next item that we wanted to focus on was really looking at the threshold limits on the peninsula. And so one of the first things I want to cover, and we talked about this a little bit at our last meeting, was the identification of the South Point Peninsula area and including an exhibit that outlines where this area would be within the actual ordinance itself. And so staff is recommending that this area be identified as all of the area south of the intersection at Nixon and R.L. Stowe with South Point Road, for the reason that this is where a transportation network really gets funneled down into one central spine going down the peninsula. So connectivity is very limited in this area, making it different in terms of its context and why it might need a different approach to transportation analysis. So currently, our traffic impact analysis requirements for threshold are for new developments that trigger either 100 peak hour trips or 1,000 daily trips. This limit is, as a reminder, 33% of the current NCDOT threshold. What is new and what is being proposed tonight is that a transportation technical memorandum be required at 50 peak hour trips or 500 daily trips. That would put this requirement more stringent than what we already have and be 16.7% of the current NCDOT threshold. Again, as we currently have today, the planning director would still maintain the capability to require either a full TIA or a technical memorandum for any special circumstances in their discretion that might have development that maybe falls below this threshold. So it's not to say that it can't be required for ones below this threshold. It would just be at staff's discretion based on specific safety concerns or exact site location or whatever is site specific to that development. So big question is, what is a TTM or a transportation technical memorandum, and how is that different from a transportation impact analysis? So they are very similar, but the transportation technical memorandum offers some enhanced flexibility during the scoping process and the conversation between the developer, the city, and NCDOT. And the intention of this flexibility is to allow areas to be identified for further analysis, specifically targeted around potential operational and safety concerns near the site. The radius for study area would still be the same as what we have now. It'd be looking at those highlighted areas of additional concern within a 1 mile radius. So that's the same as what we would require for a transportation impact analysis. And at a minimum, it could always include more, but at a minimum, technical memorandums would include an area description, which would include site access and a vicinity map, an analysis of both the existing and proposed land uses at the location, the trip generation and traffic assignment, both what's in the background and existing conditions, as well as what it would be at the time of build out and the anticipated build out schedule. And then also a summary of anticipated impacts and a conclusion. So by this analysis, one of the things that would be revealed is more analysis needed in order for us to make a determination, or are we pretty clear on what the recommendations are going to need to be, right? If more analysis is needed, the consultant can say, we've identified something here, we need you to delve a little bit further in that, and could recommend a full-blown transportation impact analysis study. So really quickly, I am not going to read all of these numbers for you, but I wanted to just have a slide that outlined the differences in those threshold areas. So the area in red, that is the proposed trigger for a transportation technical memorandum. And the area in that teal is the existing standards for transportation impact analysis studies that we already have today. So the teal is not proposed to change at all. It's just that red that is proposed for your consideration here tonight. And that is only specifically for the threshold on that peninsula area in the area as defined by the map. So, lastly, the area, I want to give you guys a little break between sections. Lastly, I wanted to talk to you about what's included in the draft text amendment related to payment in lieu. And so we had been asked to look at how we can expand our payment in lieu requirements to provide some additional clarity if a developer chose to pursue this option instead of constructing offsite improvements or securing offsite right-of-way. And so to help hopefully explain this as clearly as I can, and of course I welcome any questions if something I say in this is a little bit confusing. What we're proposing is that at the time of schematic plan review and approval, that the developer would need to figure out for themselves and then ultimately propose to the city, do they think they can get the offsite right-of-way? Or are they going to make an offer to the city for a requesting payment in lieu of the actual constructed mitigation? If they would like to request a payment in lieu, we are asking that that request be accompanied by an engineer's estimate for those improvements. So to make sure that the costs that are being offered are consistent with the costs that would be incurred for those same improvements if they were able to secure the offsite right-of-way. What staff's proposing is that at a minimum, the plans at the time of schematic plan approval be allowed to be reviewed, at least for the ask, at a 15% roadway plan level. That would be a line and grade plan. If there is interest from the city in accepting a payment in lieu of mitigation, then, or if there's not, whatever that ultimate decision is, the next step would be that a transportation mitigation agreement would then outline the approved methods of mitigation for the development's impacts relating to transportation. So for a project that is one phase, that may be pretty straightforward. We ask for schematic plan approval, there's agreements, and then pretty soon after that, they're going to secure right-of-way, right? Ideally. But for phased projects, we see this come up we've seen this one come up a couple times, and this is one of the things we wanted to make sure the next part is is, let's say a phased project, when they're coming for schematic plan review, like the Pulte project, they have 3 phases. Last phase is proposed at about 2029, right? at the time that they're proposing schematic plans, maybe they think, well, we're going to be, other than phase one, which is what they're primarily focused on, right, as their next steps after schematic plan approval. Phase two and phase three, they may say, well, our plan is to actually build all of those improvements. So we move forward. As they work, finishing up phase one, if they start realizing that, ownership may have changed at this point with timing and everything. If they then realize, well, we said we were going to actually construct improvements, but now we're going to try to request a payment in lieu of mitigation instead because ownership and our ability to secure right-of-way may have changed, then that would require an amendment of their transportation mitigation agreement. And therefore, it would require them to go back before council for that ask. So what we're proposing is not that would happen at the staff level, but if they've come up and promised the council, the planning board, and the community that they're going to actually build improvements, any change to that would also need to be a public request for an amendment. So that portion is not necessarily a requirement of all projects, but it would be required if they're requesting any changes upon what was agreed upon. By the time the project works itself toward construction plan, submittal, and ultimately approval, before approval is issued by the city, we are proposing that in the amendment, we include that the developer would be required to show proof of right-of-way acquisition, or if they do not plan to actually secure the offsite right-of-way and instead would like to provide a payment in lieu, that payment in lieu estimate, if it hasn't already been based on 25% plans, it needs to be updated to be based on 25% plans, which in NCDOT is referred to as their preliminary plans, the 25% preliminary plans. So they can either do that all up front, or if they get to this point, and they've updated those plans, they need to update their cost estimate to be able to reflect those more detailed plans. And we would propose that they are required to make that payment to the city before we issue approvals of that construction document. That way we make sure we have that agreement secured before they're going out and disturbing the land on the site. So just an overview of the cost estimate themselves. The other portions that are included in there are that the costs and the estimates that are provided should include the costs for design. So what we're proposing is that they take a portion of that design, but the design would not be completed necessarily. So they need to include costs for the remaining design that's needed for those improvements, any right-of-way, any utilities or utility relocation, and ultimately the construction of the proposed roadway improvements. This is, of course, to include a contingency that's based on the percentage of plan detail at the time the estimate is prepared. Again, the final estimate for city acceptance would need to be based on 25% engineered roadway plans and meet the standards outlined in NCDOT's guidelines that they have for consultants preparing these plans. In there, we've also outlined that these plans and estimates must be prepared by a licensed engineer and then verified by the city or our consultant at our discretion. And that cost estimates will remain valid for maximum 2 years. So that is the same period of validity as a transportation impact analysis study as well. So if they would be older than 2 years at the time of acceptance, they would be required to be updated before we would accept payment. So, in summary, what we are proposing to update as a part of this text amendment is, again, to add in some bike and pedestrian analysis and mitigation, to identify a new TIA/technical memorandum threshold for development on the peninsula, and add in some enhanced payment in lieu standards for this option of mitigation. Staff recommends and believes that the proposed text amendment is consistent with the goals of the comprehensive land use plan, specifically in the areas of mobility, infrastructure, intergovernmental relations. We also believe that this request is reasonable and in the public's best interest to address the transportation needs within Belmont. And it's with that we would like to ask you tonight to receive the report, any public comments, and render a recommendation to City Council. So again, as a reminder, just as we were before, we are looking for a motion to approve as presented, approve as modified, or disapprove, and then make the 2 required findings. There is a findings sheet for this project as well, just behind the one that you just reviewed for the other item. And I believe that's it.
Go ahead.
Cost estimates, like that.
Sure. This one or the other one?
Yeah, this is good. So, we can get engineer's estimate at 15% or 25%?
Right, so this is one of, it kept going through my mind. Originally, I had said, well, we'll just make it 25%, you know, they can go ahead and just design it 25% at the time of schematic plan, and before they even go to City Council to determine whether or not they want to consider a payment in lieu of mitigation at all. And the more I thought about that, I wanted to bring it up as a point for discussion, because in natural plan progression, we have schematic plans that are at a certain level of detail, but they get more refined throughout the process. And so the more I thought about it, it seemed to make sense to at least allow an option that says, well, you can, at a minimum, have 15% plans at schematic, and then they get refined through the process as your actual development plans get refined. But if you're going to do that, the expectation would be that the contingency built into that 15% estimate would be definitely higher than that of if you were to go ahead and prepare a 25% plan set to base your cost estimate
So
on.
have we stated what that contingency is?
It's not currently outlined in the ordinance. What we were thinking as staff and as in discussion with the consultant is that that would be something, a level of detail that would be included in the future TIA mitigation policy.
So then the other thing just related to that is, you know, Pulte is a long project, you know, to get all phased out. Is there anything in there about escalation? So they do 50% plans and you get pay in lieu at $30,000. That pay in lieu is, that $30,000 is not going to buy you much in 2 years without some escalation factor. It, you know, I mean, I know we're not trying to make money on pay in lieu, but if we're going to use that money to actually make improvements, it should consider perhaps when those improvements might be made, and escalation factors could be included.
Well, and I think that from a strictly mitigating your own impact perspective, it is a challenge to escalate it, because once we accept payment as the city, the developer is not ultimately responsible for the timeline for the city to actually make those repairs or improvements.
But then also, valid, if we're getting payment at 25% construction documents or 25% schematic,
Mm-hmm.
why is it there an estimate at 100%?
Why aren't we requiring the developer to move forward with 100% design for their proposed mitigation?
To make an estimate at 100% construction documents, because at that point, they are in the process of actually trying to build and almost build, which would then be a lot different than the cost of 25%.
Right,
perhaps.
so,
like, what's the timing? Explain all that.
Sure.
Basically, at 25%, if we're going to do, if the city accepts the payment in lieu, they're not going to do any more engineering drawings.
that's correct.
Yeah.
So you're only going to pay 20, depends on what your fee is that these guys are going to charge. You're only going to pay so much and then you're out of that. So they've got to pay the pay in lieu and a portion of the engineering drawings. You're not going to go all the way through engineering.
And we did talk about this in a fair amount of length last month. Honestly, I think this is a really good compromise.
Yeah.
Because we were originally saying 15%, that should be it. And we were like, I don't know, that seems like not enough. So this gives you the option to kind of come in low, get a rough idea, see if there's any interest before you spend the money to design. Because like a 25% plan, I mean, it's a significant effort, but it's not obviously full design.
but the accuracy level in the estimate, you're probably like 85%. You're gonna get enough where you can feel pretty confident.
It was just a question. It wasn't.
So just to recap, I think what you've said is that they do the 15% design and cost estimate at the schematic plan phase when they're coming to talk to you and talk about moving forward. And then they make a decision whether they want to do payment in lieu or if they're going to go ahead and move forward. And if they want payment in lieu, you draft up a traffic mitigation plan, agreement. And you lock it in. But then what you've done is that before they can get the actual construction plans approved, they have to go back and finish up design to at least 25%.
Yes.
And recap all their numbers and revamp their numbers, and then that's what goes into the final TMA.
Is that correct?
So that is mostly correct. So just a few points of clarification. The TMA would outline all of their required mitigation and their method of making it. So it wouldn't just outline ones that they were proposing payment in lieu on. It would say, you know, they are agreeing to build out the following improvements and offering a payment that has been accepted by the city for the remaining improvements. But yes, to your point about when those plans are updated, if the developer came in at schematic and said, well, I only want to go do roadway plans at 15% and I'll give you an estimate and a higher contingency at this point just to be able to ask council if they're willing to accept a payment in lieu. The expectation and requirement from us would then be that those plans would have to be updated before construction plans were approved, and they would have to be updated and then verified again by the city to make sure that the cost estimate provided is accurate to the best of our knowledge. Right, so 15% at schematic, and then when they're
25
coming in,
On the cost estimate.
25 before construction plan approval.
I will say this, I think you're going to have to specify what that contingency is going to have to be at those plan sets.
Yeah.
Because that number's got to be set. So at the 15%, if they do it at a 15% level,
Mm-hmm.
in my background, that would be a 30 to 40% contingency at that point. And at the 25% phase, it should be somewhere around 20 to 25%.
Yeah, correct. I think DOT specifies the percentage, right? I believe so.
So I have an email out and I'm waiting for a response on what their identified contingencies are for
At what
their
phase?
cost estimates, at what phase, just to be able to try to verify that. Because in our mind, it was always something that would need to be outlined for the development community, but it was just about whether or not it should be included in this ordinance text or in a future policy related to specifics.
But I don't think we should be bound to that. I think we need to look at how the city operates and take into the consideration the time it takes us to take action on that payment in lieu to do those improvements and figure out our own contingencies. We may need it to be a little higher because we don't act as fast or as quickly. So you can have that escalation accounted for.
Gotcha.
So somehow I think you need to figure that into the contingency numbers that you're going to require.
Sure, and it's certainly something we can continue to discuss and maybe even check with Parks on what we can do on that end without overstepping any areas.
So I've got a question. So the payment in lieu of, the way I read the text is they can ask for that if there are two conditions that exist, right? It said the developer is unable to secure the needed right-of-way or the funded transportation projects overlap improvements associated with the funded project. So they just can't come in and say, we just want to pay in lieu of instead of doing this, right? They've
Right,
got to
that-
meet those two conditions.
One or the other of those two conditions would be staff's recommendation. That way, we're not getting a blanket request from developers.
That's what
to
I was
just cut a
afraid of.
check.
Okay.
But what they're going to do is they're going to say that right away is impossible for us to get.
They're always gonna say
They're gonna
Yeah,
always-
that's my fear too. So how do we keep them from just saying we can't get it and y'all worry with it, right?
Right. So that's one of the things I think if we try to remember back to February that Parks had shared with you guys at the joint workshop is that's one of the struggles and that's one of the things that's being challenged in court right now.
Yep.
And so in order to steer clear of the legality, I believe my understanding is that the only thing we can do at this point is just if they're saying they can't secure the right of way, get that in writing from the current property owners that are denying them the ability to purchase.
So you're going to make them show they've made an effort to go out there. Okay.
Yes.
They're gonna have
Mhm.
to sign a statement saying they tried.
Well, I'd like to see correspondence where they,
Yeah.
instead of saying they tried, here's correspondence, we met with them, here's a letter to
Right.
them, and they,
Show us a copy of the offer that you made.
exactly, somebody,
Sure.
they've
To
had
make sure it's a legitimate
exactly,
good faith.
Yeah.
right.
Is
Good
there,
faith offer.
is there a legal definition of good faith effort? I mean,
It depends.
okay.
That was like a favorite question that students used to ask me. What do you mean by good faith? What do you mean by reasonable time? Just,
It's discretionary.
It's just
Okay.
I mean,
driven.
obviously, you can like, you know, I'm sure you can compare it like market
Uh-huh.
rate or tax, you know.
Yeah.
There are ways, you know, there are ways to tell, and if something's like completely
Mhm.
off kilter, I mean, that would be strong evidence that it's not good faith.
Fair market value would be a way to
Makes
see if
sense.
that was right.
But you got some documentation that they've gone through that
Agreed.
process, okay.
Agreed.
I guess kind of on that note too, is there anything preventing somebody from, just like, let's say council says, no, we're not going to entertain it. They go out, they do 100% design, they get a contractor's estimate, and then they resubmit that to city council for kind of reconsideration.
I mean, I guess that would be a question to city council of whether or not they're open to reconsidering their no.
Okay, the
Um,
ordinance is open to that though, right?
Right. I mean, the ordinance doesn't specify that. I would guess that that direction would be perhaps provided. You know, if city council was not really sure at the time of the initial request, they could say, well, you know, we would like you to provide some additional information and then bring it back to our consideration, or
Okay.
flat no, or
Yeah, I could see where the one piece of property that's keeping you from doing it, the original homeowner died,
Mhm.
the kids said.
I've had that
"Sell
exact
it,"
scenario.
You know, they'll take it. So, I mean, and that could happen after.
Yeah, sometimes it's a year later.
Mhm.
sure.
Anything else on this?
I think this is a really good compromise on everything we talked about so far. So
Can you go back to the chart with the 50 and 100?
I absolutely can. Bear with me. I think it's this.
So, Chick-fil-A, it did not require TIA.
There was one done.
Back,
So,
back before,
Yes.
City Center was
So
done.
when the shopping center initially was proposed, all the uses and sizes
Yep.
and everything was in a TIA, which was approved.
Which-
And it wasn't Chick-fil-A specifically.
Sure.
It was
2,000
certain
square feet.
size,
Yep.
Yes,
Okay.
fast food restaurant, so that was in.
but just to make a point that 2,100 square feet is a really, really big fast food restaurant. I mean, most of them are like 1,800. So for this to get down low, I think is a good thing. That we've, especially down south of Nixon, that you start adding that use down there and more traffic.
Agreed.
I mean, I think it's a good, to see that, it does its job. in terms
Well, we
of that
started
use.
at 75 and 70, but I think we changed it in our last discussion last month.
Yeah.
I
That's
think we
good.
talked them into going lower.
And even like gas station, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what gas station out there right now is doing 3 fueling stations?
Yeah.
I mean,
Like a
so,
QT comes in there and they've got 25, right? You know?
yeah,
So-
I think it's good.
Perfect.
Awesome.
The last thing I had, because I wasn't here last month, sorry. The bike and pedestrian map.
Yes.
So have we clarified like the difference between pedestrian and bike? Because the travel of a bike versus pedestrian is different. So that may not be in this text amendment, but do we consider that? We have
Do you mean in terms of the type of analysis that's done for bikes versus pedestrians?
or the area by which we're analyzing bike? Because bike could be
yeah, you'd assume a larger area
a
for a
larger
bike.
area, right? I mean, this doesn't
Right.
include
Right.
Rocky Branch, which
Right.
all of a sudden is now this huge amenity that people are going to be biking to. So what are we doing to accommodate for that in future development that would require perhaps bike lanes in a development? If it's not on the map, what stance do we have?
Right. So I'm going to be honest. The addition of bike and pedestrian infrastructure is fairly new. We've reached out to a lot of communities that have started recently implementing it. We have talked to a couple that have had it in place for a while. The language that's being proposed in the text amendment is based on some examples of those communities. What's currently being proposed is, again, just for developments that are within that center city small area plan, and the study area is consistent at 1 mile out from that. But to your point, right, bikes travel at a different speed, they travel at a different distance and everything than pedestrians do, than do vehicles.
Different roads, right?
Right.
You don't get a bunch of people driving down Julia, right? I guess you don't get a lot of people walking down Julia either, but my point
Right.
is the thoroughfares on a bike are different, and maybe, like I said, maybe it's not just an amendment, but let's be sure we think about that in the future on how we connect bikes versus pedestrian, because they're totally different.
Right, and what I will say too is the city has historically done a great job of when we can identify those gaps that maybe are just outside of what may be revealed as part of an analysis for the development team. The city has done a great job about stepping in when we learn about those things and saying, well, look, it's just this little bit more and we could provide this, great amenity. So ideally, yes, if a new development is coming in, it's just like vehicular mitigation though. It's not like, oh, well, we don't have this right now when we want it, and you can come in and we can say, well, you have to do it to get it. We're not allowed to go that level. But if their development is proposing enough volume that it's going to trigger more pedestrian trips, more bicyclist trips that would warrant maybe some additional safety upgrades or, bridging that gap, that's what our expectation of mitigation would be at this point.
And do we still have a planned update to the bike and pedestrian master plan?
So because of the size of our municipality, in NCDOT's world, we have submitted for a grant. Their threshold is 10,000 population or greater has to have separated plans. So a bike master plan and then separately a pedestrian master plan. So because our pedestrian master plan is currently the oldest plan, it was done in 2009, we have applied, this will be our second application in a row, for their consideration of a grant to help us update our pedestrian plan. We are supposed to hear back this month. As with all things, I would say if we hear by October, that would be great. And as soon as I hear, I will certainly let you guys know as
Okay.
we
I
would
remember
then
you
need to do a
mentioned that.
subcommittee.
I didn't realize that took like 12 months.
Wow.
I know. So in addition to that one, just to keep you guys in the loop on grants for bike and ped stuff, we have also submitted for a Gaston Community Foundation grant to help with costs for the Abbey Creek Greenway, and are currently working on a grant application with the Carolina Thread Trail for the same project. And so we're constantly keeping our eyes out for opportunities to help enhance infrastructure. Grants for greenways and bike and ped tend to be hot right now just because of COVID and people wanting to get outside.
That's one quick question.
Yep.
On this amendment and the impacts to the city district that you mentioned earlier, I don't remember all the words.
Yes.
Are there any developments that's going to impact, namely the one across the street from Hawthorne?
So just like every other ordinance requirement, anything that has already filed a development application is subject to the rules and regulations that were in place at the time that they filed their application.
Okay.
So it's not that we can't encourage them to choose this option, but our ability to enforce them to choose this additional level of regulation is something that's beyond our ability.
Yeah.
Approve as presented.
Second.
Y'all getting ahead of me. All right. So no further questions, I'm assuming, right? So there is a motion by Matt.
It was a long pause.
Long pause. So there's a motion by Matt and a second by Dan to approve as presented, which is actually chapter 16, right, of the code
Yes.
that we're changing. All right. Motion on the table. And there's a second, right? Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. So the next thing that we've got to do are two findings, correct?
There are two findings.
Two findings. I'm open to that, or I'll present it myself.
All right, I'll make a motion to, I'll make a motion that the project is a reasonable request in the public interest, and that the project is also consistent with the goals of the comprehensive land use plan of mobility, infrastructure, and intergovernmental relations.
Second.
There is by Nick and a second by Norman. All right, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign.
Very good.
Both those approved unanimously.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. A lot of hard work went into this, and I think at the end of the day, we ended up with a good, and it's a living document, right?
Absolutely.
As we all know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This one is a little bit more technical, so our hope was to get us as good as we could, and knowing that once we start getting people through the process, we may have some tweaks here or there, but trying to start as solid as we can.
Okay.
Starting point.
Thank you. Other business. Is there any other business?
I'm up again.
What?
Other cut.
Other
Okay.
business. Sorry for the small. All right, but you guys went through that one so fast, I didn't want you to leave here missing out. So, some items just that wanted to keep on you guys' radar. As we shared at last meeting, we were working on an application for some PL funding available through the Gaston Cleveland Lincoln MPO that would help with some planning efforts. We were able to successfully collaborate on an application and submit one for a South Fork Catawba Peninsula Transportation Study. In total, there were 5 applications submitted, and we heard yesterday that of those 5, our application is not being recommended by the subcommittee for approval. The final determination is made on September 23rd, so, but we were number 4 out of 5 in terms of ranking, so it's not looking great.
Do we need to go and get our form?
If you so choose. I don't believe as staff I'm allowed to grab one, but but I mean, I know that there's a lot of needs around our region is what I'll say. And so again, this is part of our effort we saw an opportunity. We wanted to try it out to see if we could get some fund assistance, but we know that this is something that's important for our community regardless of if we're awarded the grant application or not. So I just wanted to give you an update in terms of some funding assistance to help with this effort, but not that this effort is dead. So really quickly, the other things that wanted to put on your radar in terms of some proposed legislation that's currently still under consideration. One is the appropriations bill, Senate Bill 105. In its current state, that bill includes some language that would eliminate our municipal ability to have local stormwater rules that would help us to prevent flooding, and would also eliminate local tree ordinances like the ones we recently adopted. It has some other language in there as well, but those are the 2 that I felt like were probably of our top concern here as a planning board. In addition, there's House Bill 821, currently still alive, that if adopted and approved would bar local governments from requiring a traffic impact analysis prior to any development approval. It would bar regulations that would require a developer to construct a greenway. It would compel cities to provide water and sewer to any land within our existing ETJ. And it would also bar local governments from requiring developers to provide any funds for affordable housing or designate any specific number of dwelling units for affordable housing. There's some additional language and regulation limiting our abilities as well as municipalities, but those again were the highlights. So just keeping you guys in the loop, these are 2 that are still proposed and active, and we're tracking those. We actually have a call tomorrow to get an update on the status of these things, but as of today, the latest is that these are still alive. So just quickly, next steps for transportation. Again, following the successful adoption of updates for our transportation impact analysis ordinances, we'll be looking at a mitigation policy that will help us to further clarify details about any payment in lieu specifics, and have some discussions with City Council about what all they'd like to see included in that more detailed document. And then, again, we had some funds reserved in our CIP to help with the Belmont transportation study. And so we, in light of the news about our PL funding application, have reached out to Gaston County to see if they'd still be willing to partner with us on a peninsula-specific study, since really South Point Road is the main area of congestion and it runs through both city and county property. So our ideal would be to collaborate with them on that plan and continue to move forward even though we didn't get funding assistance. So again, we've reserved funding for transportation study. It's not anything that would be any sort of request for budget amendment. It's just a matter of whether or not we're doing it on our own or in collaboration with the county. And I think that's enough unless you guys have any questions about that or have any other things you want an update on from us.
Yes, we did, and so I do want to also mention that the city council is having a workshop on Monday at City Hall at 4 p.m. that we've invited Randy Gates and some of the members of the DOT to provide a complete update of all the projects, where they are, what the funding is, and yeah. So, yeah.
Might be in an email, I guess.
Because the funding situation, projects are still being delayed, not that they're still there and they're going to be done, but, I think the bottom line is that they're still trying to figure out how to move forward on the project. But, so you are welcome to attend at City Hall to hear the discussion, and I'm not sure if it's coordinated to be live streamed because it's at City Hall, but if it is, we'll send you the link if you just want to listen in. But we're looking forward to NCDOT visit on Monday.
Any other business? Board members have any business? If not, I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved by Matt, second by Dan. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. We stand adjourned.